It's a global networking association. And GitPro aims to bring professionals in all fields of hardware and software together for their career and personal development while contributing back to the IT profession and community. GitPro aspires to represent the interests of Indian professionals in the policies and issues related to information technology. GitPro started as IT professionals of Indian origin, that is ITPIO, almost a year back, had events held almost every alternate month since its inception. Friends, I would like to invite the founder of GitPro, Mr. Khanderao Khan, to share with us the progress of GitPro. Mr. Khanderao works as principal architect at Oracle. He also participates in various standards, writes in technical magazines, and is co-authoring a book. Mr. Khanderao is a social activist for a very long time. He led various programs, including very big events in Bay Area, which was attended by more than 10,000 people, and exhibitions that were seen by more than 75,000 people across the USA. So I welcome Mr. Khanderao.
Good evening and welcome to all of you. As mentioned earlier, that we started a year back as IT professionals of Indian origin, and so it was a need that many of us felt that there are many organizations for many specific things, whether in the marketing, those are the areas, and finally what we would like to do is the serving aspect, and that we haven't started. Very soon we'll see some activities around that. Some of the events, just like I mentioned, that a few of the topics that we had arranged, and we had a lecture on last year when the economy was very bad. We had Sanjeev Goyalji who came over here, and he gave excellent guidance on how to find jobs and how to win jobs. Similarly, as you know, that there were a lot of immigration issues right now. On that background, we had organized lectures by Kalpana and Inderpreet. They are very prominent lawyers in Bay Area. So similarly, as you can see, that various topics and various relevant topics to the IT professionals we could arrange this year. I would like to invite Nitin Stoff, who is our chapter coordinator. He can give us some glimpse of the upcoming events.
And I'm a product manager at Avaya. So very quickly, going through some of the future events. As Khanderao mentioned, 15th August is a very, very important day for us. That is actually the launch of, it used to be ITPIO, and now we call it, we rebranded it as Global Indian Technology Professionals, GitPro. So 15th August is very, very important. So the idea here is in this slide, what we want to do is we want to sort of give you an idea of what is happening and mark your calendars, please. So two things coming up, 17th July and 15th August, and please mark your calendars for that.
Dr. Swamy is globally recognized for his continued key contribution in the field of economics and beyond. He jointly co-authored with path-breaking study called as Index Number Theory with a Nobel laureate and his guru, Dr. Paul Samuelson. Political career of Dr. Swamy has been full of courage, commitment, and actions towards futuristic and better India. He has served as Member of Parliament 5 times from different places. He has held key cabinet positions in the Union government twice. Now, relating to today's topic, Dr. Swamy is well experienced and recognized scholar on Indo-China relationships and more international topics. He has received scholarly acclamations for his prolific writings. He played an instrumental role in normalizing Indo-China relationships during 1978-1985. He is also credited for getting Kailash Mansarovar Yatra started. Dr. Swamy has visited China more than 8 times, and maybe some of you may not know, he can speak Mandarin Chinese also. Dr. Swamy. Now, when it comes to future of India and really the global future, Dr. Swamy is an exemplary patriot, rarest source of great knowledge and rarest source of great inspiration for thousands and thousands of people like you and me. Without further ado, I humbly invite Dr. Subramanian Swamy to please guide us.
Speak to you about first the comparative analysis of the economies in the two countries, and then I will go on to speak about the possibilities that open up for Indians, scientists, particularly IT people. First of all, I'd like to say something about the background of the two countries, which I think need to be kept in perspective, because this would be helpful for me to discuss where India and China may compete and where India and China may cooperate. China and India are no ordinary countries, not only because of the size, they're large size countries. They are the only two billionaire population countries. Both of them have populations above 1 billion. The third country is America, which is way down, 350 million or so. And what is significant about these two countries is that they were considered developed countries by then prevailing contemporary standards till about 250 years ago. India and China's share in the world GDP, right from the year 1000, for which some kind of estimation is possible, right from 1000 AD all the way up till about 1750, at in excess of 50% of the world GDP. And the population was about 40%. Today, the percentage has come down to 15%, but in 1947, 47, India became independent. China had a revolution, communist revolution. In 1949, a new People's Republic was founded. And around this period, say around 1950, the combined share of the two countries was just 7%. So from 50%, it had declined. There's no two countries, or not a single country anywhere in the world which has this kind of history. There are countries which were underdeveloped and became developed, like Europe and the United States. And there are countries which are developing today, like countries of East Asia and Africa. But India and China are the only two countries which were developed once upon a time by then contemporary standards, and then became poor because of a variety of special reasons such as imperialism, and now are in the process of growing, and the two countries are growing at the rate, leaving aside the last year, at the rate of about in excess of 8.5%. Of course, it's very difficult to compare India and China economically unless you're an insider, which means you must know how data is produced in China. India has a long tradition in producing data, statistical data. Our first census took place in 1871, and every 10 years we have held a census. But China's first census ever in its history was held in 1982. And they don't have the tradition of collecting statistics as we do. But more importantly, the Chinese concepts are different from the international concepts. For example, food grains. Every country weighs food grains after the paddy husk is taken away. But China is the only country which weighs food grains by including rice as paddy. First of all, I'd like to say something about the background of the two countries, which I think need to be kept in perspective, because this would be helpful for me to discuss where India and China may compete and where India and China may cooperate. China and India are no ordinary countries, not only because of their size, they're large size countries. They are the only two billionaire population countries. Both of them have populations above 1 billion. The third country is America, which is way down at 350 million or so. And what is significant about these two countries is that they were considered developed countries by then prevailing contemporary standards till about 250 years ago. India and China's share in the world GDP, right from the year 1000, for which some kind of estimation is possible, right from 1000 AD all the way up till about 1750, at in excess of 50% of the world GDP. And the population was about 40%. Today, the percentage has come down to 15%, but in 1947, 47, India became independent. China had a revolution, communist revolution. In 1949, a new People's Republic was founded. And around this period, say around 1950, the combined share of the two countries was just 7%. So from 50%, it had declined. There's no two countries, or not a single country anywhere in the world which has this kind of history. There are countries which were underdeveloped and became developed, like Europe and the United States. And there are countries which are developing today, like countries of East Asia and Africa. But India and China are the only two countries which were developed once upon a time by then contemporary standards, and then became poor because of a variety of special reasons such as imperialism, and now are in the process of growing, and the two countries are growing at the rate, leaving aside the last year, at the rate of about in excess of 8.5%. Of course, it's very difficult to compare India and China economically unless you're an insider, which means you must know how data is produced in China. India has a long tradition in producing data, statistical data. Our first census took place in 1871, and every 10 years we have held a census. But China's first census ever in its history was held in 1982. And they don't have the tradition of collecting statistics as we do. But more importantly, the Chinese concepts are different from the international concepts. For example, food grains. Every country weighs food grains after the paddy husk is taken away. But China is the only country which weighs food grains by including rice as paddy, that is, the husk is included. China is the only country which includes potatoes in food grains. So consequently, there is an inflation of figures. China's calculation of current prices and constant price estimates are very, very faulty. And therefore, it is never advisable to compare data produced in the statistical abstract of China without first going through a data correction. And I was the first one to do it in the field, and that's why I earned a name. And that is why, despite the fact that I don't do any academic work in India, I'm a full-time politician, but every year Harvard wants me to come and teach for one semester at least, and the summer semester for me is the most convenient because it's so highly compressed and it's too hot in India to do politics anyway. So therefore, what can be done in India sitting at home and in an air-conditioned room and telephoning, I can do it from here too. So this is two extraordinary aspects. One, they were developed countries, and now they are regaining their position. That is how now the London Economists and other new magazines, influential magazines, are portraying it. They are saying that India and China are recovering their positions. Now, in terms of GDP calculated after using purchasing power parity prices, not exchange rates. I do not divide by Indian rupees GDP by 50 or 47 or whatever is the exchange rate dollar to get the dollar estimate, but actually compare prices in the United States and prices in India and then calculate the ratio and then take a weighted average. That number is different from 46, 47. It's much lower. It's closer to 26. So therefore, the purchasing power parity rates, by using that, today the number one GDP country in the world is the United States, number two GDP country in the world is China, and number three since 2008, after overtaking Japan, is India. So in fact today there is a triangular situation: United States, China, India. And whether this is going to be a triumvirate or it is going to be a triangle is going to be a very important question in the future. And we have to decide whether India is going to be with China against the United States or India is going to be with the United States against China. And hopefully it never happens that China and the United States combine against India. So that's the first part. Second part is that they are very fast growing countries. There are very few countries, certainly of this kind of size, there's no other country in the world where it is growing at 8.5% per year. Official statistics of China put it at 10.5% per year. But as a rule of thumb, I would say, if you ever see the United Nations figures, United Nations doesn't correct these figures because they don't have the nerve to correct Chinese figures. Chinese influence today in the international bodies is so strong that that no international agency, whether it's the United Nations or the IMF or the World Bank, makes these corrections. It has to be done by scholars, and that's why my latest book, which has just appeared, which I have prescribed as a text at Harvard, is called Economic Development and Reforms in India and China. I, of course, published in India because it's much faster to produce, publish books in India. If I try to publish it in the United States, it will go to a referee and he may not like me and he may delay it for 2-3 years. There's usually a backup of 2-3 years. So therefore I've published it in India and it's also much cheaper. You can get the book here at $30 airfare paid. So therefore if you are interested in knowing in detail about the two economies in comparative perspective, you can refer to my book. And third important thing, and this is something that has to be fed into your mind every time you discuss India and China. These two countries are neighbors. They are large neighbors. But except for 1962, never in the relationship of 2,700 years, I mean known relationship, there may have been relations even earlier, but known relationship from 2,700 years, there's never been a conflict. The two have lived in peace side by side, except for that 1962 period. India and China, despite being two large countries, they have never gone to war till it happened in 1962. And what happened in 1962 is a big story, and I don't want to go into it, but I certainly think it's something that we could have avoided. There's also another interesting aspect in our relationship. Till the communists came to power, it was widely believed that India influenced China culturally. And in 1936, when Harvard celebrated its 300th anniversary, they invited scholars from all over the world to Harvard University. Harvard was founded in 1636, so 1936 they celebrated the tricentennial. And at that time, the scholars from all over the world. They called the president of Beijing University. His name was Dr. Hu Shi, one of the most famous poets of China. And he came, and his lecture, which Harvard published in the combined volumes of the tricentennial year, is titled Indianization of China, a case of peaceful cultural borrowing. Now, we have ourselves forgotten that history, but the Chinese remember, and Dr. Hu Shi is not very complimentary about Indianization of China. He thinks that all this negativism and pessimism in China is talking about the 1936 period, was due to the fact that we Chinese absorbed everything from India through Buddhism. Of course, Buddhism that went to China is different from the Buddhism that went to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was the pure form of Buddhism, which was called Hinayana Buddhism, whereas what went to China was called Mahayana Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism is practically the same as Hinduism. And therefore, the concepts of karma and reincarnation, all these have been absorbed into the Chinese psyche. And when you travel as extensively in China as I have, I can tell you it's remarkable to see that families, the Moors, the evocatives, everything is so similar as to us. It's very easy to get used to China in no time, in peacetime. So in this background, I would say that we need now to evolve a policy. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of comparison to the two economies, let me say we need to evolve a policy which doesn't sacrifice our national interests, but it certainly preserves our ancient relationships. We must be have good relations with China without sacrificing our national interest. We need not be fooled into thinking they are our brothers, because even brothers can quarrel. In fact, quarrel between brothers tend to be more bitter than quarrel between friends. And Jawaharlal Nehru's great mistake was to assume that just because he said Hindi Chini bye bye, that literally it's going to be Hindi Chini bye bye. There are interests of the two countries which diverge, and either we should try to converge them, or we should prepare to meet the consequences of that divergence. Now, in view of this background, the fast growth, the question before us is: should we build on the positive factors that exist between two relationships, and emerge as global collaborators? Or do we learn from the past negative developments and prepare to compete with China? That is, competing with China literally means confronting with China. Now, which should we do? This is the question. If the two of us collaborate, we become very powerful. And that happened in Copenhagen recently in the Environment Conference. The two of us combined and the whole world just collapsed before us. And they agreed with the consensus draft that India and China together prepared. But that is a optimistic scenario, that we collaborate with them. But if we compete with them, then of course it's going to be a confrontational situation, and whether we are ready for it. If we have no choice, of course we should be ready for it. Let me first just begin by a little history, by periodization of our relationship. The first period, which can be considered kind of homogeneous period, is 1870 to 1950. This is a period when India was ruled by Britain and China was not ruled by any foreigner, but it was besieged by 5-6 foreign countries which sought one concession after another concession from China. This is the period of the great decline of the two countries. And this decline took place very systematically, and it went over this entire period. By 1950, both countries had become very poor. Then the period 1950 to 1978. This period is the period when both of us foolishly adopted the Soviet plan, the Soviet economic model, the Soviet planning techniques. And both of us adopted it in different versions. China, much more pure Soviet model, and we not so pure because we had some kind of a private sector, but it was hand and foot bound, but still the private sector existed. We had a democracy which China didn't have. Now, our having democracy has some disadvantages because anybody can come and travel anywhere in India and write whatever he likes. Whereas in China, it's not so easy to travel anywhere you like and write whatever you like, even now. As a consequence, India always gets a bad image compared to China. And all that foreigners can write about is the beggars that you see when you land from an airport and move out in the city. Well, in China, you don't see the beggars because they are kept away. They are beggars, but they are kept away. You don't see them. And people go to Shanghai and they go to Dalian and Beijing and then come back and go into raptures about how China has become a modern city. Let me tell you that China's modernity itself is not Chinese. It is based on foreign direct investment. And that foreign direct investment came because China removed all clamps on building activity. Any foreigner could come, their land would be given without hassle, and they would build on it, and all that one had to do was give away 2 floors to the Chinese, and the remaining would be the foreigners building. And much of Shanghai, much of Beijing, much of Dalian, and all these places have been built by foreigners on money from abroad. India could have had this kind of modernity had we also allowed foreign direct investment in real estate. We do not, because we are all the time quarreling, shall we do it, not do it, we go on discussing and discussing. And this is what has delayed the modernization of Indian cities. And we are allowed for foreign direct investment, then of course there are pluses and minuses, but certainly you would have had people coming and going completely gaga about how modern India has certainly become. So there again, it is not a Chinese achievement. So having said that, let me say that the Soviet period also was a disaster because it was unsuited for both our countries. The model was based on the principle that all the investments will be plowed into the capital goods industry and the resources for it will be squeezed out of agriculture, and there will be no exports and there will be no imports. That was the general Soviet model. The Soviet model, by the way, finally failed everywhere in the world, starting with India and China, and in the end even the Soviet Union. I remember the communist leader once taunted me, that is EMS Nambudri Padi taunted me when there was a crisis here of the Savings and Loans Association in 87. So he told me, that in Soviet Union there is no inflation and there is no unemployment and there is no poverty. And see what is happening in America. In 1991 I told him, now there is no Soviet Union also. Because it broke up into 16 countries, you see. the Soviet model was ultimately shown to be a completely bogus model, and that this comes out to the comparison between East Germany and West Germany. Now, this is about as laboratory-like comparison as possible. Germany, one country, was one country, divided into two after equal destruction in 1945. One adopted democracy and market, the other adopted dictatorship and socialism. And the result is there for all of you to see. You go to, even today, you see the difference between East Germany and West Germany. Same thing, North Korea, South Korea. You can see the difference. Same people, one people, divided into two, and today South Korea is far ahead of North Korea in economic development. So there is absolutely no doubt that for economic development, we need a market economy, and it was a great act of foolishness. In the case of China, there is some understanding why they did it, because it was a communist revolution. So communist revolution, accepting a Soviet model is no surprise. But India, why did they accept it? And that is because of the unfortunate assassination of Mahatma Gandhi and the premature death, I would consider it premature or untimely death of Sardar Patel, that the Nehru, who had gone to Cambridge and got completely brainwashed by all the left-wing liberals that were there, and came back and brought socialism, which was totally unsuited for India. The model failed because it was based on the assumption that the financing of the capital goods industry would be done by extracting resources from agriculture. There were no resources in the agriculture to extract. The imperialists had completely bled it. In India, through the zamindar system, they had completely bled agriculture, and similarly, the landlords and the feudal lords in China had bled the system there. So there was nothing to finance. Once the capital goods were produced, there were no buyers because you were not exporting. You discourage exports and imports in the Soviet model. And therefore, all this ended up in inventory. And that's why this model failed. Anyway, 1978, in India, because there was a change of government, and a Janata government came in, of which of course I was a part, some economic reforms started. But in China, Deng Xiaoping took over, and he completely changed it. India could not dismantle the Soviet system, even under the Janata government. It took 1991, when I became Commerce Minister, when we first dismantled the Soviet system in India. But fortunately, by that time, the Soviet Union itself had been dismantled, so it became much easier to do so. Then becomes the period of fast growth. And that is 1992 onwards. And particularly after 2003, the growth rate has been in excess of 8% in both countries. And this is a phenomenal growth rate. Now, what are the main strengths and weaknesses of China-India? Generally speaking, you find where the complementarity comes is what is China's main strength is also our weakness. And what is our strength is also their weakness. For instance, China's main strength is clearly infrastructure. And our main weakness is infrastructure. And I don't see why it should be, because building a road is not a big thing. We build very good roads abroad. Why you can't build it in our own country? I remember one American told me that they were amazed at the road. One of the reasons why Iraq fell so fast was from Basra to Baghdad. The roads were lovely roads. And, their tanks just went on it smoothly all the way to Baghdad. And I told him that road was built by India. And at that time we had very close relations with Saddam Hussein and Mrs. Gandhi was in power. We built roads in Nigeria, we have built roads in Malaysia, we have built beautiful apartment buildings in Soviet Union, in Germany, so on. India has demonstrated capacity to build infrastructure. But somehow, because of corruption, we are not able to have good infrastructure in our country. Whereas China has built a tremendous infrastructure. Whether they can use it or not, that's another matter, but the infrastructure exists. This is one strength which China has improved. On the other hand, China has a potential weakness which we can exploit any time. You will see China's trade. Everybody speaks about how wonderfully China is doing in exports, and look at their foreign reserves. They're growing to $1 trillion and all that. But how is that being achieved? If you look at the Chinese trade and then decompose it, you find that China has a deficit with East Asian countries, and it has a surplus with European Union and the United States. The surplus is much larger than the deficit, and therefore overall there is a surplus. Why is there a deficit with East Asian countries? Because all that China does is imports semi-processed goods from East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, so on, and then it value adds to it in China, and then exports it to the United States and Europe. And why are these the East Asians doing that? Because they earlier on used to directly export to Europe and America. Now they find it much cheaper to do it through China, and therefore they send it to China. And so Taiwan sends the computer almost ready, and all that Lenovo does there is put in the casings, etc., and then that comes here. Most of made in China that you see are not wholly made in China. It's made in East Asia, and China adds the value-added part to it, and then puts a chop on it, made in China. So this is one potential weakness of China. Because supposing East Asia tomorrow decides, why send it through China, let us send it through India, then China will collapse. And if I were an Indian strategic thinker, I would be wondering how I could persuade East Asia to divert that traffic to India. And the only reason they don't do so, these East Asians, is they say you have no infrastructure, and what we get in India is a lot of hassles, whereas in China, you go, once they've decided they want to do it, everything goes like a shot. So, of course it's true, because even though we have deregulated at the center, at the state level, still for electricity connection, you need money. For buying land, you need grease. And for everything there is some hassle there. And at the state level, we have not streamlined it. And therefore, consequently, most of the East Asians are not doing it. But in tomorrow, if we streamline our state regulatory apparatus, and we also build a decent infrastructure, that East Asian processing trade will come through India, because Indian labor, skilled labor, is cheaper than China. And that's why it will come. Secondly, India's intellectual property laws are better than China. Indian courts are better than China. China, if you're on the right side, anything goes. If you're on the wrong side, you end up in jail. So that uncertainty is there. So consequently, here is a great opportunity that lies for India of wooing the East Asian. There are many things that we can do together. In the IT field, China is strong in hardware and relative to India much weaker in software. I think what ranking you have called SCI CMM or CMM SCI. I think these rank 5 countries or grade 5 companies. I think we have amongst the largest in the world, maybe more than even the United States. In terms of quality, we have demonstrated quality in automobile parts. The Deming Prize in China is won Deming Prize is won by India, that prize which is given by Japan. So automobile ancillaries is a great opportunity for India, where India and China can collaborate. Some work has already started, but more needs to be done. In software, NIIT, run by my former student in IIT, Dr. Rajendra Pawar, he has done a miracle there. It's worth going and seeing the way he has opened schools, and there is demand for it. This is one area where China would, if the relations are good, use Indian talent. India has an abundance of talent, and we could export teachers, educators, set up schools and so on in China. That's a great opportunity that exists. By the way, I must tell you that 20 years ago, the world was praising China for its one child per family policy. And they were making fun of India. Well, Mrs. Gandhi and her son Sanjay Gandhi thought that they would replicate it here, but unfortunately it backfired and they lost the election. And the net result is that that kind of policy was never properly not implemented. So India has had a birth rate declining, but it is very slow and gradual. Its death rate is declining faster, so there is a different growth rate population is definitely high relative to China. But China implemented its one child per family policy, and today suddenly they find that after 2015, the proportion of population in the age group 15 to 64 is going to start shrinking. It's already shrinking in Europe. Japan, it is terrible. And the United States has managed to keep that proportion going because they have been quite liberal in imports, particularly from Mexico and Philippines. And so, therefore, United States has managed to fill that demographic hole. But India, by 2015, will have 50 million excess skilled manpower. And we are in a position to export that. And all the other countries are going to be deficit. China is going to be deficit after 2015. And I'll tell you what is the problem of a population which ages fast, is that the number of people coming into the labor force becomes smaller than the number of people retiring and going, which means that in the past, the number of people who came into the labor force, the deductions in their salary and all went to pay the pension of those who are retiring, who are fewer in number. Now what is going to happen is that the number retiring will be larger, the number coming is smaller, so there is a pension bomb which is looming over as a crisis over all European countries. Greece's problem essentially comes out of that because they are unmanageable debt. All of them are going to have this problem. The only country which is not going to have this problem is our population problem has suddenly become a demographic dividend for us. I mean, those people who used to lecture us about the population problem, today they say India's demographic dividend. So it is a complete turnaround. And I have to thank the Indian people for having defeated Mrs. Gandhi on this issue. And therefore we have had, it's not that our population growth rate is going up, it's going down actually. But it's gradual, not the steep fall that China has had. And as a consequence, India is going to be placed in a very great advantageous position, provided this new young stock of labor is properly educated. And therefore the educational system becomes extremely important. I support the government of India's new policy to allow foreign universities to come to India. A lot of people are protesting, particularly the left wing is protesting, thinking that if Harvard and Stanford and Columbia and all these universities come and open campuses in India, as the proposal now is, then that is good for us. And I think we should take advantage of it. And if the NRIs were to also do both, stay here as well as come and spend some time in setting up these institutions and helping them, then India would be in a tremendously strong position to be able to help the whole world, including China. Let me also say that economists recognize that the majority contribution to the acceleration and growth rate of any country is due to what they call as productivity. And productivity is due to innovation. Innovation is when you bring out new ways of doing things. And in this, Americans are past masters. They have a tremendous record on innovation. And on everything there's innovation. 20 years ago, the safety pins I used to buy in the market are different from the safety pins I buy today. All other parts of the world, the safety pin has not changed in design. But in the United States, some change is always there. They are all the time innovating. In 1987, I had come to teach for 2 years at Harvard. I had taken leave from politics and I came to Harvard to teach. And at that time, the talk was that America is going to be bought by Japan. In fact, Japan bought Rockefeller Center and there was a complete depression in this country at that time. But very soon afterwards, the Americans invented the internet. And the internet changed the way production is organized and brought this whole globalization process and cut transaction costs. And the United States suddenly grew very fast in the 1990s and the early 21st century. And so one innovation changed everything. Today when I see what Apple is doing in its in iPad and iPhone and so on, you can see that the American enterprise is still there. So I will never not write off the Americans as the Americans themselves are writing themselves off. The Americans have the capacity to innovate, so they will be in the forefront. But the only other country who can match the Americans in the future in innovation is India. So therefore, if we can get our educational system in order, the infrastructure system first, then the educational system in order, then we will create a vast army of innovators. And these innovators will change the way we do production. And there are many, many areas where we need to do our research. Already, of course, the world recognizes it. Many of the research centers in China have now come to India. GE has brought the whole thing to India. The GE capital has moved the whole thing to India. Cisco and Texas Instruments and all them, they all moved to Bangalore. And so the world recognizes that India has that, but China has a disadvantage there. Because although they are putting in a lot of money into research, they are putting a lot of money into the universities, they don't have democracy. Democracy is essential for innovation. And therefore they may have more investment, they may pump in more capital, they may have more labor, but ultimately their growth, future growth depends on innovation, and there we have a tremendous strength. We can therefore also collaborate with China on that. And we, consequently, the areas exist in vast numbers. Certainly I would say we will have to sooner or later export with China, compete with China on exports.